Sorry about that. Welcome to the September Planning Committee. Welcome. Just note that the meeting will be live streamed and recorded. If we move to agenda item 1, do we have any apologies for absences or substitutions at all? Are we all present and correct? Yeah, we're all present and correct. Thank you. Agenda item 2, I'd like to propose the minutes of the previous meeting as being a true and correct record. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Pearson. Any comments on the minutes of the previous meeting? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Chair. On item 22, regarding the enforcement at Paddock Close in Calverton, I just wondered if we had an update on that, Mr. Avery. Thank you.
I'm unable to provide an update at this meeting, but I will ask the Enforcement Officer, Phil Thompson, to provide you with an update tomorrow.
Thank you. Any other reflections, comments? We're okay with the accuracy? Okay, shall we go to the vote? All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? You're in.
I just wasn't there, so.
Thank you. That's carried. Move on to agenda item 3. Do we have any declarations of interest, either pecuniary or non-pecuniary?
Thank you, Chair. Non-pecuniary interests. I'm a member of County Council.
Thank you.
Relating to item 4.
Thank you. Any other comments? Thank you very much. I'm going to change the order of the running order tonight. I'm going to do item 5 first, because we have a speaker who's an objector, Yvonne Poxon, and I think it's better if we take this one first, because I think the next item might be the previous item might be a long item, item 4. So we have a speaker, Yvonne Poxon. She's an objector. Do you want to approach the lectern, Yvonne? So you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Start when you feel comfortable,
okay.
And I will stop you when the 3 minutes is up.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'm here with reference to plan application 2021/0734, which is from a takeaway, 16 Westdale Lane. I live at 17 Victoria Street, which is a private and unmade road, and the wall of the said storeroom runs the length of my carport and is only 9 foot from my front door and approximately 15 foot from my back door. I feel that this is exceptionally close, with an element of noise disturbance also impacting on the privacy. The proposed entrance facing Victoria Street shows a door and a window, and this would not be in keeping with the current 15 properties on the street. Residents have made major concerns regarding further vehicles travelling up and down the unmade road, as there are no parking facilities. This was raised with the planning officer on site, but we were assured that the applicant had no intention of any vehicle accessing Victoria Street, and that the plan now shows a garden, in inverted commas, not a vehicle standing on it. Councillor Jenny Hollings was at this site meeting as well, and she did query whether we could get an enforcement stating that they couldn't park on this bit of land with a clause, as they'd said that they would never use it for parking. Would it be able to be put in writing? But we got a negative answer from the planning lady. We're beginning to query now whether the road that was put across the street was actually put in the right place, because this bit of story we're talking about is more on the Victoria Street than towards Westdale Lane. With regard to the drainage, there's a massive problem with both sewerage and surface water. There is no provision for surface water, consequently results in flooding of this unmade road, which is already in a bad state. And blockages occur from time to time in the sewerage drains, and the sewerage backlogs until it comes to a complete standstill. And it all backs back to number 17, which is where I live. Intervention is then required to unclog the blockage so that eventually, after rodding and hosing it, it's allowed to flow freely again. It's a very unpleasant job. So there is no room for additional piping in this respect to the existing system, but have not been given any insight into this, which is exceptionally important, as the proposed plan shows toilet, shower room, etc. to be... Pardon?
Your 3 minutes are
Are they?
up. Sorry to interrupt, your 3 minutes are up.
Okay.
Yeah. Would you like to take a seat and make yourself comfortable?
I can't mention the third bit then, no.
Thank you, Yvonne. Councillor Craig Miles will now introduce the application. Sorry, officer. No, I saw you raise your eyebrows.
Not yet, anyway. Thank you, Chair. The application relates to an existing building within Gedling Village Local Centre. It's located on the northern side of Westdale Lane East, within a parade of existing commercial properties. The ground floor occupies a hot food takeaway, and above and behind the takeaway are existing residential apartments. Now, what's proposed is a relatively small quantum of development. In essence, it's proposed to create a first floor apartment through a first floor extension to the rear of the building. And it would face into the internal courtyard, as you could see in the middle of the site plan there. Now, an external staircase is proposed to access the first floor apartment, and internally it be arranged at ground floor to create another bedroom within the existing apartment to the rear of the takeaway. Now, a new pedestrian access would be formed from Victoria Street, which would be formed in the flat roof section of the building. You can see here, and in front of it, that hard standing would effectively become an area of amenity ground for what would be the first floor apartment. Now, in terms of consultation responses, we've had an updated consultation response from Highways to clarify they do not object to the application. The Environmental Health Officer does not object either, but highlights that the development would need to comply with Section E of the building regulations, which is separate to the scope of planning, which sets out standards to limit noise and vibration between existing and proposed residential properties and commercial properties. In terms of the planning matters, the principle of development is accepted because at national and local level, it's actively encouraged for using town centres and upper floors to be converted into residential properties. And that's echoed by the recent permitted development right changes in 2021. In terms of the visual appearance, it's considered that the changes would be visually acceptable and would not significantly detract from the character of the area. It should be noted that the proposed changes would only be seen from very, very few public viewpoints. In terms of amenities considered, there will be no harmful issues relating to loss of sunlight or daylight as a result of the development, or any loss of amenity through direct overlooking. It's considered that the storage area to the rear of the premises would not create any greater harm than it would for use as residential accommodation. Now, in terms of public parking access, there'd be no off-street car parking spaces proposed. And I think this forms the crux of a lot of the objections. The application site's been assessed against the Council's supplementary planning guidance document. I'll just run you through important parts of it here. Applying the guidance would equate to 0.8 unallocated spaces, not an allocated space, an unallocated space, and that would mean the use of on-street car parking. Now, the Highway Authority don't object to this, but also contained within the SPD, it's stated that if the development is served by one or more public transport service routes, this may be considered and justified as a reduction in parking provision, especially if the site's located within a central area. Now, in this instance, we're in a local centre, village local centre. Indeed, we're only 31 metres from an existing bus stop. Now, I've prepared a plan here for 100-metre radius from the site. You note that there's 4 bus stops and indeed 1 public car park within 100 metres of the site. So in conclusion, the overall recommendation is that planning permission be granted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, I'd like to propose item 5 for the purpose of debate. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. Any speakers? Yes, Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you, Chair. Just a clarification, really. When and if this application is complete, am I right in saying there'll be 2 bedrooms and no parking provision? Have I got that right?
Chair, on ground floor, the apartment would be converted to form another bedroom at ground floor, and at first floor there'd be 1 bedroom. I know you're probably going to point at the committee report, and I think one of the first paragraphs actually incorrectly states there'd be 2 bedrooms in the first floor apartment. So apologies, Chair, it would be 1 bedroom in the first floor apartment as proposed.
Okay, but there's no parking provision at all?
No parking provision is proposed, no.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bestwick. I've got Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I was also going to seek some clarification around the fact that the existing flat already doesn't have parking provision. And the only other point I'd like to make is I never like it when we use public car parks as reasons for justification of saying that there is sufficient parking around, for the simple reason they're not 24-hour sites, and they're not. So for that reason, they're not going to be used by residents. They would only potentially be used by visitors, and I think it's a little bit misleading if we use that in our assessment as to whether there is sufficient parking in in a neighbourhood. Having said that, I'm certainly not convinced that we have sufficient grounds not to approve this particular application, but I would certainly urge caution in future in terms of how many properties we do authorise which go against our original SPD in terms of parking provision.
Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. I have Councillor McCrossan.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just confirm the the changes to the property on Victoria Street? Is there access into the new accommodation? Can you just confirm that?
Chair, yes. If you look, at the top right elevation, proposed side elevation, and you'll see a small flat roof element. And if we could just tie that up with the picture, that is that flat roof element that you see pretty much centrally within the image there, just next to the side entrance to the chemist.
Yeah. My concern would be that obviously it's quite close proximity to the property 17, and as the first speaker pointed out, it just seems to me that the temptation to park so close to there might, somebody might find that quite tempting to suddenly pull up and, oh, I want to leave the car there. And in doing so, blocking the gate of 17. That would be my only concern. And I know it's said it's going to become a garden. How long will it be a garden before somebody just says, oh, let's gravel it over and turn it into a car park spot? That would be my only concern.
Chair, a couple of points is it was initially shown as a car park in space, but it was withdrawn. Quite very, very tight to get a decent sized car or van in there. What we could do is condition any consent to require the garden must be in place and perhaps even fenced off prior to occupation.
Thank you. Councillor Elwood.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, just looking at that photo, above the carport at number 17, there's obviously an extension. Are there any windows from that extension looking onto the development? Just wondered whether there was any issues of overlooking or.
We've assessed all overlooking requirements, and there's no issues of overlooking between what's proposed and what the present situation is.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Pearson and then Councillor Smith. Sorry, my mistake. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. I know it's rare when I say that I agree with Councillor Wilkinson, but on this occasion I wholeheartedly do. It is really frustrating. I've said it before. Our SPD that you've alluded to earlier says that it's okay because there's public transport on the doorstep. The problem with that is we, as the local authority, don't have any grounds to restrict who moves in. So we don't have any grounds to restrict that property to people who only use public transport. And as Councillor Bestwick pointed out earlier, it's a one-bedroom property. You can still get two adults who drive, move into that. So then we've got double the problem. And then in the next breath, when we talk about public transport, in the next breath, we then encourage the occupants, if they do drive, and if there are two cars or one car, again, we can't restrict that, to use the public car parks. I think this authority has done a great job at trying to develop that bit of Westdale Lane in Gedling. You've got brand new shops just moved into what used to be a car dealership at the bottom of Westdale Lane there. And what we're basically doing, and I don't mean this disrespectfully to officers, of course, but what we're basically doing by, if we pass this, is saying to those businesses who've just set up, start-up businesses as well, some are very good, that car parking space that was used for customers to increase your footfall, we're now going to put housing occupants in there because they can't park outside the house. And to me, I'm sorry to say that is totally ludicrously bonkers and unfair on the businesses, and it's unfair on the people who we want to live in these properties. And in this day and age, to have an SPD that says we only need 0.8 car parking spaces per property is totally ridiculous. We all know that no matter how much we encourage people to cycle, we look at new schools being built where they put cycle drop-off points but don't put parent parking, because don't worry, they'll all cycle everywhere. They don't. People don't. They're all going to use their cars. So, like as Councillor Wilkinson says, sadly, there's no grounds to vote to reject this because our SPD ties our hands behind our back. So maybe it's time we look to update the SPD so we're not sat here meeting after meeting all saying the same thing. We all agree that properties should come with parking. Let's update our SPD to allow us to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Smith. I have Councillor Gibbons.
Yes, in terms of queries raised about car parking at the back, would it be possible just to see a wider photograph of the exterior at the back? Okay. Right. If you could,
is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, is there a wider one? Because I'm concerned about cars coming
through,
parking in that area in front of the gates there next to number 17. Those gates there, cars actually parking and blocking that driveway.
That's the only image that we've got. In terms of cars coming up that street, I can't see how that would be related to the development because we'd be blocking that off as a car parking space at the present time.
Okay, thank you.
Any obstruction of a driveway will be a matter for the police in any case. It's not lawful to obstruct a driveway, so that's something that could be investigated separately. But I think the same could be said for any driveway. Somebody could park across your driveway or my driveway in any residential street, and that would be unlawful to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gibbons. Councillor Strong.
Yes, it's been referred to about making sure there was a condition that this garden area had a fence, but do the plans actually show a barrier? Because that currently is an open space. And you would expect something to be shown in the plans to make it a garden rather than just a space for a car park, because human nature being what it is, as other speakers have said, people are going to park on it.
You'd still need obviously a pedestrian access to get to the door, but it was just simply a suggestion in terms of putting something up there. There is no boundary treatment in there other than on the plan, the bottom left drawing, the floor plan, you'll see an area identified as, sorry, my eyesight's not that great, as garden, grass, sorry. So there's nothing stopping us attaching a condition to put some sort of boundary treatment on there, if necessary.
Thank you, Councillor Strong. Councillor Pearson.
Thank you. I've been to the properties nearby in the local area, obviously Gedling councillor. I'm not personally in favour of this. I'm not personally in favour of properties where unfortunately we allow no conceivable parking for people, because as quite rightly said, the colleague quite rightly said, people don't rely on the buses. And I'm frustrated that we're in a position as a planning committee and as a council where none of that really matters to the planning decision, and it's difficult to find a legitimate reason to refuse it. But I would hope, as my colleague has said, that we can look at the rules and regulations for parking, and we don't rely on our local car parks. We can't be sure they'll be there forever. We can't be sure things won't change. But I am frustrated. I do appreciate if we can ask for a condition for some fencing. That will certainly help the situation with the lady at number 17. And we can support the lady at number 17 if there's any issues with antisocial behaviour or parking in her property. But I'm very frustrated that we're in this position in the first place. But I do thank you for the help you've given us in trying to do the best you can with it.
Just if I could add, Chair, its actual requirement is if there's on-street car parking, not public street parking. That's almost a bonus to the argument that it's suitable. So it's simply on-street parking as a test.
Thank you, Councillor Pearson. Any other comments at all? Anybody else want to speak on this item? Okay, thank you. So the debate's over. Shall we move to the vote? So we're voting on agenda item 5. The recommendation is to grant permission, but I think we have an extra condition. Is that right?
That's correct, Councillor Allen. So the officer proposed an additional condition requiring details of the boundary treatment to enclose the proposed garden to be submitted to and approved in writing prior to the first occupation of the hereby approved first floor flat.
Thank you. Is that clear with everybody? Happy with that? Okay, all those in favour? Could you just keep your hands raised whilst the officers check the account? Okay, all those against? Any abstentions? That was carried. Thank you, Yvonne, for speaking at this item. Thank you. Sorry, I can't involve you in a discussion during the meeting. Sorry. I'm sorry, Yvonne, I can't involve you in a discussion during the meeting. Okay, thank you, councillors. Can we move on to agenda item 4? This is land at Chase Farm, land off Lamley Lane, Gedling. We have 2 speakers, and because of a late objection and the issues that were raised, well, the 2 speakers for the applicant and the complicated nature of this variation of condition, I'm going to allow 20 minutes for the county council officers to speak. So initially a maximum of 20 minutes. So would you, the officers are, and who's going to speak first? And you are? Right. Stephen Pointer, who's the team leader, team manager for planning policy at Nottinghamshire County Council, and the other speaker will be Mike Sharp, who's the strategic pupil placing officer at Nottinghamshire County Council. So you have 20 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we're pleased to be able to give this opportunity to speak to the committee in respect of this application. I'm Stephen Poynter, manage the development contributions responses to councils. My colleague Mike Sharp heads the place planning side of the education department, looking at the forecasts of education needs and ensuring sufficiency of school places. This application is seeking to enable a variation in the existing planning agreement for development at Chase Farm in respect of developer funding for education. It seeks to redirect it towards where pupil demand is now greatest in terms of education at secondary level. There has been a demographic shift in the demand for school places since the Chase Farm development was originally approved in 2016-2017. As Education Authority, the County Council works very closely with districts and borough councils across Nottinghamshire to ensure that there are sufficient school places in a locality, especially when new housing areas are proposed. We comment on all major applications for new housing from an education perspective to assess the impact of that development on the availability of school places. And we seek developer contributions towards expanding places where that's necessary, either through expansions of existing schools or new provision. We use the evidence of need that Mike Sharp's team provides as a basis for all our position. This is a detailed set of forecasts that have to be approved by the Department of Education and also allow for and take account of and build into those projections estimates of future housing in a locality. And we get that information on future housing expected over the next 5 years from the district councils, from your own 5-year housing supply statements, because that is the most reliable and robust estimate of future housing in an area. When we commented on the Chase Farm application, originally it was estimated there was a demand for a primary school to serve the Chase Farm development. And the agreement, as entered into, provided an obligation on the developer to make available a school site and appropriate developer funding at appropriate trigger points throughout the development. The site was required to be made available and offered to the County Council after 200 houses have been built. And in fact, last year, well over 340 dwellings had been completed by that point. And we were being contacted regularly by Keep Moat Homes regarding the point at which the land was available and was available to be transferred. The County Council had to decide on its approach. When we elect to build a school, that is a separate decision from the original estimate of need, because of course over time circumstances change, pupil forecasts change, estimate of housing delivery often changes, and we have to take a further decision on the need for a school at that point in time. So the obligation is on the developer to make provision, and then a decision is on the Education Authority as to whether that obligation is necessary and still required. We carefully considered pupil demands at last year and earlier this year, along with our relevant councillors, and took into account the latest position regarding pupil demands. So I'd like Mike Sharp now to explain what those pupil demands are now looking like as they affect Chase Farm. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Steve. Since the approval of the Chase Farm development, the demand for school places across Nottinghamshire has evolved, and the number of pupils on roll at primary school has gradually reduced, due largely to the falling birth rates, which has been reflected nationwide. Moreover, the County Council has supported the delivery of a new one-form entry primary school on the land at Teal Close, which has resulted in the Rivendell Academy being built, which has increased the supply of places in the Carlton planning area. And this will prevent pupils that are resident in the land at Teal Close from needing to seek a school place in the existing schools in the planning area, thereby releasing additional capacity support demand from Chase Farm. The latest pupil projection data, which was approved by the Department of Education, as Steve has referenced, in October 2022, indicates that there will be a surplus of places within the Carlton planning area over the next 5 years. There is forecast to be approximately 300 primary school places available across the planning area during each academic year. The projected demand is inclusive of the demand for school places anticipated by the housing at Chase Farm during the projection period, which equates to 704 of the 150 dwellings permitted. Given the surplus of primary school places in the Carlton planning area, as outlined in the NCC submission, which you will hear shortly, there is no sufficiency case for NCC to commission a new primary school. The presence of surplus capacity is such that if NCC were to press for a new school, it would not be sanctioned by the Department for Education. They wouldn't allow it to happen. In order to run a free school presumption, which is the only means by which NCC can commission a new school, the County Council must demonstrate a need based on insufficiency of school places. That would be impossible for us to do. We could not demonstrate an insufficiency of school places. Also, the DfE would require us to run what's known as an informal presumption before the formal presumption process. This is where NCC canvasses the views of other stakeholders. Given that other schools in the locality have got spare places, they would be very likely to oppose any new school being built on the grounds that it would jeopardise their continuing viability. In other words, there is a surplus of school places, and if we were to add another school into that mix, it would simply add to the surplus. There are 3 primary schools within a 20-minute walking distance of the centre of the Chase Farm, including Stanhope Primary, which is 0.7 miles away, Phoenix Infant School, 0.9 miles, and Haddon Primary School, which is 1 mile. The number of places forecast to be available in each of these schools is sufficient to meet the future needs of pupils living at Chase Farm. At the time of the Chase Farm planning approval, the County Council identified an insufficiency of secondary school places in the catchment area, and that would be at Carlton Academy. Since this time, the County Council has funded a 300-place expansion to the Carlton Academy, which was completed in 2020, but there remains a forecast deficit of secondary school places across the secondary planning area over the 10-year forecast period, including both at Carlton Academy and at Carlton Willows. And as I'm sure colleagues in the room will know, there's a very significant expansion of Carlton Willows happening as we speak. The children have just begun entering into those buildings. The County Council is committed to funding the expansion of Carlton Willows, but this is insufficient to meet the shortfall from 2024-25 onwards, which is forecast to exceed 450 places. The Red Hill Academy Trust is proposing to expand Carlton Academy by a further 150 places. However, this is dependent on the external funding being made available. The project is anticipated to cost circa £6 million, which is why the developer funding is needed, hence the need for this application to vary the Chase Farm planning obligation. Thank you very much.
So just to conclude, we consequently advised the Borough Council and the developer of this position that there wasn't a case for a new additional primary school directly serving Chase Farm. But we wanted to preserve the developer contribution that has already been agreed into education, to preserve it so it could be redirected towards where the need is. Planning obligations have to be necessary. They have to be justified by being necessary. It is now necessary for those obligations to fund secondary school expansion. And we were then invited to make a formal planning application to do this variation. We do recognise the concerns that have been expressed that there's no longer a case for a new primary school at Chase Farm. And turning to the objection that has been raised, we would still say that the development at Chase Farm still offers a sustainable location for living, well served by local facilities, including primary schools, within a 20-minute area where people can meet their needs, within a short walk or cycle. Our application demonstrates, and your officers have acknowledged, that pupil demand from Chase Farm can be met within reasonable walking distances of the new properties. And there is now a more urgent need to fund secondary school places to serve Chase Farm going forward. So this application simply seeks to ensure that the developer funding can be applied to education provision. Any refusal or deferment of this would not change the evidence which shows a sufficiency of places. The situation would be that we would not use the developer funding because there's no need, and the worst case situation is it would have to be handed back. In terms of the late representations that were made earlier this week, we have followed these normal procedures to look at a certain point in time when the obligation asks us to decide whether we're going to take on a parcel of land in order to deliver a school. That happens across the county, irrespective of where we are. We're having the same conversations in other districts because of the demographic change in primary age pupils. This is not unique. We are reviewing catchment areas, as has been referenced in our response to objections. There are changes that need to be made to ensure that catchment areas are updated, and those are being done. There isn't any evidence that walking routes would be unsafe, and we are referencing the need and the opportunity and the commitment to delivering an additional safe crossing facility on Arnold Lane, which is a requirement of phase 2 of Chase Farm. There's been reference made to other housing sites potentially coming forward in the area. Those are speculative. We only deal with development that we know about and has got a commitment by the Borough Council to deliver and a timescale attached to it. We have to make our forecasts robust. So we will be updating those forecasts and take into account housing at the time it's permitted and expected. We're not certainly saying that Rivendell, that has been mentioned, is an alternative to serve Chase Farm. It serves a different part of the borough, but it just adds to capacity in the wider planning area, which is a group of 15 primary schools that we look at in terms of pupil demand and capacity. The secondary school issue has been identified by officers even in 2016. And because the borough's community infrastructure levy has been safeguarded to secure the Gedling access road, we've been unable to use SIL as a means to fund secondary education since then. So no developer contributions have been made to secondary education for many years in the borough. So we welcome the officer recommendation and which is in the conclusions in section 12 of the officer report. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for your comprehensive presentation. We'll move now to Planning Officer Nigel Bryan will introduce the application.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just really like to summarise really some of the points that have been received by members in an email from Councillor Michael Payne, and also just to emphasise that there's also been a 121 a petition signed by 121 people that have also objected to the application. But just to summarise some of the points that members may have previously read, it is that Nottingham County Council should not renege on the need for a school on the site, which has long been promised to occupy the development. The other schools identified, Haddon, Phoenix and Stanhope, may be within 20 minutes of the site, but this does not take into account physical barriers, e.g. Arnold Lane and the local topography, which is very hilly. There are other sites coming forward in the near future, some of which are under the control of NCC, that will generate a large amount of primary demand, which has not been taken into account in the projected forecasts. And the funding should not be repurposed for secondary education, with this an ongoing issue, which the County Council has been aware of for a number of years and failed to address. Alternative sources of income from national government or NCC reserves should be sought for the expansion of the Carlton Academy. In terms of how it's viewed by officers, and just summarising the application in the round, here is the Chase Farm site, and here is the aerial view. The actual school is this kind of L-shaped, building on the master plan, and this is, obviously wouldn't be built. And I'll leave this screen up, but this in effect shows the three schools that have been mentioned: Stanhope here, Haddon, and then again my eyes fail me for the third one. But what members have been asked to do is to modify and discharge a planning obligation to transfer the primary site, and for the contribution of the 3.6 million to be spent on a shortfall of secondary provision, as well as a contribution to utilise for a pedestrian crossing over Arnold Lane. The case identified by the applicant is that the development will generate 105 primary spaces, and there are three schools within a 20-minute walk, Stanhope, Phoenix and Haddon, with two of those three schools having capacity to absorb the spaces required. Most notably Stanhope, which is the closest to the site and could absorb 111 pupils. Based on these figures, there is no longer a demand for a primary school at Chase Farm. However, there is a shortfall in secondary places which is accepted by all parties, and this 3.6 million will be repurposed to meet the demand for the Carlton area. Just in terms of that pedestrian crossing as well, this is the site that's been identified as a possible location for the pedestrian access across Arnold Lane. Now, weighing all those matters in the round and considering recent comments made by the previous speakers, it is still considered that it's been demonstrated that the school would not serve a useful purpose, given that there are capacity at nearby schools. Therefore, it is recommended that the application be granted permission and indeed a variation entered into to allow the reallocation of the money toward the expanding secondary provision and the pedestrian crossing. And those details are outlined on pages 45 and 46 of the committee report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Nigel. Legal Officer Sarah Fayaz would like to introduce the item from a legal point of view.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to speak to members this evening to set out the legal framework for this decision. So an application has been made to discharge the planning obligation to transfer the primary school site and to modify the planning obligation to pay a financial contribution towards primary provision. When determining such an application, members must consider whether the existing planning obligations serve a useful purpose. So that's the test that you must bear in mind. So an obligation may be discharged where it no longer serves a useful purpose. An obligation may be modified where members are satisfied that the obligation continues to serve a useful purpose, but would serve that purpose equally well if it was modified. Or members may consider that the existing obligations continue to serve a useful purpose and should continue to have effect without modification. So that's your legal framework. You should identify the purpose of the existing planning obligations and consider whether those obligations continue to serve a useful purpose when determining this application. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we've got to the point where I'm going to propose item 4 for the purpose of debate. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Smith, thank you. Do we have any speakers on this item? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for the presentation and the legal context there, which I think was pretty clear. Look, I understand the upset faced by those residents who live on Chase Farm. They bought a property thinking they were going to get a new primary school built, and therefore I understand and appreciate the petition. But look, the developer now knows, and the data in our pack that we've all read is public and makes it clear that the demand for primary places just simply isn't there anymore. So that leaves us as an authority today with two options. A, we reassign that funding to secondary, where the demand is, or hand it back to the developer. It's the only two options we've got as an authority. The pupil place planning figures based on our borough's housing plans speak for themselves. There's a 257 place surplus in existing primary schools surrounding Chase Farm, that's in the pack. And Nottinghamshire County Council on page 55 make it absolutely clear that they're working with the schools that surround Chase Farm to amend the catchment area to allow those at Chase Farm to attend the schools with the surplus. We've all been told through the presentation by the County Council officers that the birth rate is declining. The declining birth rate hits primary schools first, because that's the first step on the ladder to education. So we're coupled with two issues there. Birth rates declining, add that with a new primary school being built on Chase Farm. What that will risk is it will add more surplus to the school place planning figures, and parents will have a wider choice of where to send their children, which we all welcome, that's a good thing. However, with a bigger market and not enough children to fill the schools' budgets are based on how many pupils they get through the door. So all the fantastic support that our schools in Gedling offer through SEND provision or one-to-one teaching assistants in every classroom, which is a bonus if you can get that in schools, all that would be cut because you won't have the pupils through the door to fund it. So adding more surplus to the demand would just simply risk the drop in provision in surrounding schools. I don't want to look at the residents on Chase Farm in 5 years' time who ring councillors up. It would be not me, but the ward members for Gedling, who say that their school provision is lacking, because we're going to add to that if we don't go with the recommendations today, because there's a risk that schools would have to cut back because they're not getting the kids through the door. With that said, if you look at the other diagram in the papers, which sets out the secondary deficit, the deficit is 503. 503 places we need in this area. That's where the demand is now. And Carlton Academy can expand to meet that demand, but they can only do that with the funding from this site. Let's give it to them. Let's give them the money. Let's fix the problem today. The application isn't providing the option to build a primary school, and if you read the petition online, which was sent to all members by the county councillor for this area, it sets out that the primary school could be funded using other mechanisms if the developer was to retract this money, because that's the only other option. The DFE would block it. The DFE would block it. And at the same time, we'll have lost the developer's funding. So what have we done? We've won absolutely nothing. We're no further forward, but the only further forward we are, the only step forward we are, is that we haven't got the money to fix the secondary problem anymore, because the developer's got it. So that's what's options on the table. I think it would be hugely detrimental even further to the Chase Farm residents if we didn't vote for this recommendation, because they wouldn't have the secondary school places to apply for, which they need now. So let's vote for the recommendation, let's reassign the funding, and let's get those secondary school places available for those families.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. I have two, 1 second, just let me note this down. Right, I have Councillor David Ellis, then Councillor Catherine Pope, and then Councillor Elwood to speak. Councillor David Ellis, and I've also now got Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very uncomfortable with this proposal, and I take account of the legal advice that we ought to be looking at seeing whether the obligation continues to serve a useful purpose. But I think there's two sides to the discussion. There's one, do we need a primary school? And secondly, do we need to fund secondary places? Now look at the primary school. If you look at the initial description of the scheme, it describes it as 1,050 dwellings and a local centre with a retail unit and a primary school. Now we're not building a desert, we're not building a soulless estate, we're trying to build a community. And those, to my mind, are the elements that go towards a community. Mr. Pointer repeated the assertion that's in the County Council's planning statement that provision of a school within the site is not integral to the functionality of the development. Now, we've heard from Keep Moat and Homes England that the primary school is an essential part of the community, and that's echoed by local councillors at borough and county level. They all disagree with the county council's assumption that you don't need a school to help make the community. And I tend to side with Keep Moat and local councillors. You know, this is a brownfield site. People complain, people encourage us to build on brownfield sites, but then we have to build everything that goes with it. I mean, I've got some sympathy with the concerns about affecting the viability of schools. And Mike Sharp mentioned the fall in birth rates. Be interested to know what proposals the County Council has to address that. I mean, those figures, it's not Chase Farm, it's the figures of diminished birth rate across the whole of the area. But looking at this, the projection is based on 70% of the homes being built. I don't know what the assumption, why this assumption we're only building 704 out of 1,050. I expect us to build all of them. And looking at some of the, what happens afterwards, if we've got a 5-year planning horizon, what happens when the remaining houses are built? And looking at the specifics of one example, of Haddon Primary, it seems to be assumed in the papers that this will take a bulk of the primary school pupils, and it's just not suitable. The topography is not suitable. We know it's uphill. Everybody that's been round and leafleted or delivered around there knows that is just a totally inappropriate way to expect primary school age children to travel. So what that will mean is more of them will drive. And we already know from round Haddon Primary that the local residents complain about the number of vehicles and the parking around those streets. So it's just not a satisfactory alternative. And we know that the County Council itself plans to sell the Gedling school site for houses, which brings me to the second side of this, which is the secondary school places. Unfortunately, and we've heard this from Councillor Smith, this story changes. I remember a few years ago that there was a lot of discussion about the Gedling school site and whether there'd be an adequacy of secondary school places in Gedling. So I Googled Philip Owen and Gedling school sites, and I got two stories. There's one here from the Nottingham Post, March 2019, where the chair of the Children and People's Committee said, "We're not sitting about doing nothing. We've already allocated 2.6 million basic need funding to increase 2 schools in this area. Comments that there are a shortage of places are complete nonsense. There's no shortage, and we have a clear plan in place for the future. A lot of panic has been caused by recent comments, and I want to clarify, we have a clear plan." And then a year later, May 2020, Gedling Eye, and it's presumably taken from a press release from the County Council, headline, 11 million to be invested to create 450 extra secondary school places in Gedling. So the story essentially saying, we've looked at the figures, we know the figures, and we're going to deliver these places. And now, 3 years later, the story's changed. All of a sudden, we no longer have that funding for the secondary schools, and we no longer need the primary schools. I just find that very difficult to take. The report talks about 150 places being dependent on external funding. I'd be interested if that's the case, what happened to the 11 million that was going to guarantee places in 2020? There are further questions that I think we need to address. If we're looking at the issue about whether we need sufficient, whether the planning obligation is needed, I'd be interested to know what the plans are for the surplus places, what the plans are for the site of this school. We'd have more houses in there, so we'll lose the community centre, the community facilities. And for 7 years, the County Council has been telling us that everything's fine, that we need more primary school places in this area. That now all of a sudden the story's changed and we haven't. It's not a very credible story from my point of view, Chair. Thank you.
Is it a point of order?
Yeah, just some clarification. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I may be wrong, but I think the funding you alluded to in the latest press release of 2020 was funding that's actually been invested in Cartley Willows, and that site was completed this week. They've had more classrooms and more school places, and that funding came from the funding that was alluded to in your press release. I just want to make that clear. This funding is funding for additional school places at Carlton Academy.
I don't want this to turn into a tit for tat, but I'm going to just allow David to...
Yeah, just to clarify what the press release says. It says, this agreement is part of an ambitious programme of investment to meet the projected needs of approximately 750 secondary school places in Gedling by the start of the 2027-28 academic year.
Thank you. Stuart, you're not the next to speak. It wasn't a point of clarification. Thank you. Okay, so the next speaker is Councillor Catherine Pope.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Ellis has made a lot of the points I was going to make, probably far more eloquently and in more detail than I would manage. So I will just add that I'm disappointed that we as councillors, and more importantly the residents on that estate, are being asked to pay the price for a poor job done by the County Council. And in having been given extra time to speak, I'm also disappointed that I don't think they fully addressed the concerns raised in the objection that we were all emailed. So I would support deferring the item until we've had a fuller response to consider. And I also think it's disingenuous really to say we can only look at the current planning when in handing back this land to the developer, then what are they going to use it for but to put in an application to build more houses where more children will live who will need access to schools. Thank you.
Can I clarify, were you proposing a deferral?
Does it have, if it has to be formally proposed, then yes, I will do that.
It does, if you want to propose it.
I propose it.
So, Councillor Catherine Pope has proposed a deferral for the reasons she set out. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Graham Pope seconds the deferral. So I will open the discussion on a deferral. Does anybody want to speak? Right, so let me start the list again. Okay, I've got Councillor Sam Smith and then Councillor Bestwick and then Councillor Elwood. Thank you. So Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. Just on the deferral, I read the email that you alluded to, Councillor Hope, I think. Pope, sorry. I read the email, and the whole reason, from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong again, is that they want the deferral to allow the County Council to look at other funding mechanisms to build the primary school. That's the reason why the author of the email, Councillor Payne, as the County Councillor, wants this committee to defer the decision. Can I just be absolutely clear? And I think the County Council officers were absolutely clear. Even if any of you offered to pay for the school to be built, or the Chase Farm residents offered to pay for the school to be built, or the County Council said, here's the money, build the school, the DFE would block the school. It wouldn't get built ever, during the 5-year pupil place projection figures that we have in front of us today. It would not get built, whoever and however it was funded, because the surplus is too high. There isn't the demand for it. Full stop. It just wouldn't happen. So deferring it for what? Deferring it for what? Because if we don't pass the recommendation on the original proposal to reassign the funding, the only other option with this application, like it or not, is give the money back to the developer. We don't want to do that. We've got the funding. Let's put it where the demand is, which is in secondary. There is no point in any deferral whatsoever.
Thank you, Councillor Smith.
It's a point of order.
Okay, I'll take what?
I'm just asking whether the councillor is speaking as a borough councillor or a county councillor at the moment.
Which point of order is it?
Well, it's around a conflict of interest.
I think the assumption is, as he's declared an interest and he's sitting on the Gedling Borough Planning Committee, he's, as a Gedling Borough Councillor, he's speaking as a Gedling Borough Councillor. Thank you. Right, now our next speaker is Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you, Chair. I think we need to all remind ourselves that this is a planning committee for Gedling Borough Council. It's not a political football to be bounced around between us. And those of you who are using it as such should just remind themselves this is a planning committee.
planning point, please.
Thank you. Look, we've heard all the evidence from the Notts County Council. They're not making this stuff up. When Gedling Borough Council gave Nottinghamshire County Council the demographic report, which was in 2017-2018, then they were the numbers, and it was thought that it would be the right thing to build the primary school on Chase Farm. Well, a lot's happened since then. It's 7 years ago, and the demographics have changed. And despite the question from one councillor, the Notts County Council are not responsible for the demographics of Gedling Borough Council. A lot of the residents are responsible for the demographics. So this is a clear choice. We have the legal framework that the purpose is to provide school places. We can amend it so that the school places are no longer primary schools, they are secondary schools. We would be failing in our duty if we didn't allow them to do that, and we would probably lose the money to the developer. The only reason you would turn this down is for political reasons, in my view.
We're talking about a deferral, not turning it down.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Beswick. I have Councillor Elwood.
Thank you, Chair. I just would like some legal clarification. If we were to defer this application, is there an increased risk of losing that financial contribution from the Section 106 agreement? I don't know if you could just maybe clarify that. Thank you.
I don't have the terms of the Section 106 agreement to hand, but usually the way that the obligation would be worded would be to transfer the site and pay the financial contribution on a certain trigger, might be 60% of the houses being built, for example. And once that money is transferred, then the clock starts ticking for that money to be spent. So I can't answer the question as to whether that money's been transferred yet. I don't know if that trigger's been met. If it has and the money's been transferred, then yes, the clock is ticking in terms of spending and the financial contribution. And that's usually, again, I don't have the terms of the agreement to hand, but that's usually 7 or 10 years to spend the contribution, after which time it would need to be returned to the person that paid that money. It would have to either be spent or committed for expenditure within that time frame.
Thank you. My next speaker is Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. I will speak in respect of the deferment rather than the application itself, and I'd like to speak in support of deferring. My concern at the moment is the primary surplus isn't a great one, and I'm not sure that I've seen enough evidence from the County Council of what happens when that surplus is is exhausted. You know, what's plan B? Do we go back to the drawing board? Well, I'd like to see more detail from the County Council, what they will do, you know, when that surplus is exhausted. We've been given examples already of sites that are going to come forward, not least the site where this school is currently planned, and ironically the site of the old Gedling school, and clearly that's going to, those and other sites that come forward will eat into that surplus and very quickly remove it altogether. So I'd like to see more detail from the County Council about that before being able to make a decision.
Thank you. Any more speakers on the proposal to defer? I have Councillor Strong.
Thank you. I'm not sure if it's actually a deferral. I need some clarification. The point of this, there's a lot depending on projections and numbers. We have tables for 5 years projections and then a 10-year projection. So really this is about the statistics which I want clarification on, and which I'm sorry, I'm trying to be consistent here. Logic would say to me that your numbers in primary school over a 10-year period would be roughly the same as the secondary requirement, plus or minus a certain percentage over the variation. If you take that out from what is being said, that there is quite a significant deficit in secondary education provision, which if you didn't have this development would need to be provided for by the Department of Education. So do we have any information about what is independent of this development and what would have happened anyway?
Is this going to affect the way you vote for or against the deferment? Is this going to affect the way that you vote before or against the deferment?
I'm just trying to understand the logic behind the figures at the moment.
Perhaps we can answer that question later on in the debate, after the deferment debate. Okay, any more speakers? Okay. Shall we move to the vote? So the proposal is to defer the decision on this item until coming to a decision on this item until the next planning committee. All those in favour?
Do you need reasons for the deferral?
The reasons for the deferral, I think, were more information, was it? Can you turn your microphone on? Can you turn your microphone on?
Deferral till we get a fuller response from the County Council officers to the points raised in the objection we received by email.
So you're not happy with the response?
I don't believe we've had a full response.
And can I just clarify that the deferral will inform your decision as to whether the primary school obligation serves a useful purpose? Will that further information inform that decision?
Yes.
So the reason is to obtain further information to inform the decision on the application. Okay. Is everybody happy to go to the vote? Yeah. So all those in favour of deferring this item? Thank you. All those against? Thank you. And abstentions. Okay, so that was carried. So this item will be deferred until the next planning committee. Okay, thank you for that. We'll move on now to agenda item 6, which is for noting any comments on future applications. So for those that are watching in YouTube world, we just had a trio of dogs enter the committee and we had to take a moment to get them out because they're not voting members. So I've forgotten where I got to. Future planning applications. Any comments on future planning applications? It's for noting. No, so we're happy to note those. Now we'll move on to item 7, which is planning delegation panel action sheets, which are for noting. Again, any comments on those at all? So we're happy to note those. So under item 8, I'd just like to say that it's Sarah's last planning committee. She's leaving the council. She's been here for, I'm told, 4 years. She trained for the first 2, and she's been a fully qualified legal representative for the last 2. And she's told me that she had a fantastic time here, and we like to thank her for all the great work that she's done. She's moving to pastures new. And on that note, I'd like to close the meeting. Thank you for your attendance.